I found my first pastor. I kind of identify with him a little bit. He couldn't sing a lick, but thought he could. And he had two songs that he would sing, and when he would sing them, there wouldn't be a dry eye in the house. I don't know if we were crying because we couldn't wait for him to shut up, or if they actually struck a chord. The first one was Zion's Hill. Do you remember that song? I won't sing it for you. But the second one was Tell Mother I'll Be There. Now, we can't find it in our hymn books, but it's usually in one of those old Southern gospel little pamphlet books. But it's an old song, and it speaks about a mother's love that continues to love, and it's an unconditional love. And the one thing that every one of us have in common here is we all have mothers. Now, my mother's with the Lord. And I think, was it last year or year before that I did the flower talk with the white roses and or carnations and the red carnations. And I think about my mom a lot. And I miss my mom. And there are some things about Mother's Day that I think when I bring to the table some of these messages, I think like Father's Day, we all we sit there and we cringe because I give you these examples, and I think that most of us feel in some way or another that, well, I can never live up to that. But that's not the case this morning. I guarantee you, it's not the case this morning. I actually thought about just, passing over Daniel 5 for today, and then moving in and doing a message on mothers, and then I looked at Daniel 5. How many of you watch some form of reality TV? Now, I'm not a big reality TV person unless it's Buckmasters or bass fishing. Now, in essence, those are reality TV shows. Would you like to know where the first reality TV show came from? It started in 1945 as a radio broadcast. It would air for 20 years. Now, as a child, boy, this is going to date me. As a child, I remember certain things about this TV show. I grew up in the days of Zorro and the Lone Ranger and Hopalong Cassidy. But the thing is, I remember this. And through the week, I already decided that I was going to go this direction. I was going to stay in Daniel chapter 5. And the problem with Daniel chapter 5 in verse number 10 is we don't know who that queen mother is. And so as I began to research this, and as I began to read for myself, I found out that she was quite a gal. Now, you want to know what that TV show was? It was called Queen for a Day. I see the wheels are working. It is the precursor to what we call reality TV. It ran for almost 20 years. And it's based upon 3 to 4, sometimes 5 women that would be chosen, and that they would sit in front of a radio audience, or it would eventually, in 1957, it would go to television. And I think a couple of years before that, it would jump networks. But it was 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day, and it was so popular that it moved to 45 minutes a day. And they would take these women, and they would share their stories. These heartfelt trials and tribulations and some tragedies. And they had what was called an applause meter. And if you were in the radio audience, you would choose the queen for the day by clapping. And the lady that got the most applause would get a crown, a purple robe. Thank you. And she would have roses, and they would give her gifts like appliances and overnight trips and things like that. And so I got to tell you, I don't know what goes on up here sometimes. Don't say a word. But through the week, as I studied this Queen Mother in Daniel chapter 5, that popped in my head. I don't know where it came from, but it did. And so I began to look at it. Product integration came as a result of that show. In other words, salesmen and the commercials that you have to wade through in order to get your programming are based upon Queen for a Day. In fact, there's a phrase that Jack Bailey, who was the host of that, he phrased this: every woman should be a queen for a day, every single day. So this morning's message is a very simple title: Motherhood, Queen for a Day. Now, when I look in Daniel chapter 5, and I'm just going to read several verses, especially when the queen mother comes in, and I mentioned some things about her. You have to be very, very careful when you look at someone like this because she's not named. We don't know her name. And as I began to research this for the series, Troubled Times, I found that there was an interesting curiosity that rested with some theologians and a lot of historians. They tried to disprove the book of Daniel. They tried to say that it did not belong in your Bible because they could not find a mention of a king by the name of Belshazzar. And then they found something. They found an Abydos cylinder. And all it was is a physical record of both the Persian army and the kings that fell in line or in succession after Nebuchadnezzar died. And you remember between chapter 4 and chapter 5, it's about 23 years. And so when you jump from chapter 4 to chapter 5, you have to realize that Nebuchadnezzar has died, and there has been this reign of terror. But there's one constant through all of that, and it was the queen. The queen. She ruled for that 23-year period in transition with her brother, her husband, her son, and then her other son. And the hard thing is to make sense of where the other son came from. So as I began to research this, and as I began to think about this, and as I looked through this, I found that if you were looking at commentaries that were pre-archaeological era, they would dismiss it as, well, we don't know, so let's don't try to guess. But when you reveal certain things through archaeology and history from both Josephus and Herodotus, weird name, these guys have records of both the Persian army and the time when Nebuchadnezzar ruled in the kingdom and those kings that would immediately follow. Now you remember, they didn't last long. His son, Amiel Marduk, only lasted 2 years. And then there was another one that came, and the brother-in-law, which was Nigaglassar, he's the one that basically had that guy killed. And then his little child, for some reason, took the Labishar Marduk, I think that's how you pronounce it. He only lasted 9 months, and they clubbed him to death. But the constant behind all of this is the queen mother, Nitocris. Now, I'm going to give you an option, but I'm going to tell you which way I went. I know that Belshazzar was the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, but not through the lineage of the male, but through the female. Now, there are those that are, like I said, pre-archaeological era that believe that this was the widow of Nebuchadnezzar. No, I don't follow that one. I follow that this lady, which we have record of, both historically. The narrative isn't in your Bible, but there's enough of a narrative for me to look at some things and go, you know what? I'll be careful not to spiritualize this woman. We don't know, like we don't really know if Nebuchadnezzar actually found God. We believe that he did. But I'm going to have to go out on a limb and I'm going to think, well, okay, there's things about this lady that we need to pay attention to. And this is a woman that you can relate to. She wasn't perfect. In fact, I don't even know if she's a great role model for motherhood. But I noticed there were some things that are consistent with both the Bible record, because God thought it important enough to give her 3 verses in your Bible. And so for the first time ever, I'm preaching a Mother's Day message, Motherhood, Queen for a Day. And here we go. Let's look at a few verses, and you ladies can relax because in more than one way, I think you'll probably be able to relate to this lady. I don't know if you recognize it, but there was a transition in Daniel's life several times. And he was a mainstay in Babylonia. He stayed strong. He stayed true. And I'll get back into that later next week. But we found that there were some things that were consistent in Daniel's life, and there were some things that were consistent in this Queen Mother's life. I think survival might have been on her mind. How do I survive when there's such political unrest in the kingdom? And then there's her son, Belshazzar. How do you survive that kid? Now, some believe that he was as old as 36, and some put him right around in his 20s. Don't know how old he was exactly. In fact, we don't even know how he came up on the scene. We don't know if she hid him away. We don't know if he always was in line for the kingdom. We don't know that. But we do know this. After that child was murdered, Nabonidus was elected as the king. He was chosen to be the king. You know what he did? Or do you know what she did? She married him. She married him. And he ruled in Babylon for 3 years, and then he hightailed it across the Arabian desert, and he stayed in a place called Tema. And he ruled from there until he did battle with the Persian army about 50 miles south of Babylon. What we do know about Nitocris is this. Let's read this. Now, I won't go through the first 9 verses, but I'll just simply say this. This young man, was an idolatrous pagan. And he was having this drunken party that got out of hand. 2 people were not there. The Queen Mother, nor Daniel. A lot of people like to find out, well, where was Daniel when all this was going on? Well, he's in his mid-80s. Somehow he had been put aside on a shelf. And the king proper had no real understanding or no real, and we'll find that out by reading a little bit later on in the chapter. He really wanted to know, is this the same Daniel that my grandfather, which was Nebuchadnezzar, is this the same one that my grandfather confided in? And of course, the Queen Mother says, yes, this is he. Let's read those verses. It says, then the king Belshazzar, and by the way, in the ESV, and I think it's the New Amplified Bible, it says that when she came to him, she said, why have you gotten so pale? He went from being this drunk, which is red-faced, to being a guy that's white, ashen, pale. He was terrified. Why was he terrified? Because right in the middle of this revelry, remember what he did? He took those vessels that came out of the temple of Jerusalem, the gold and the silver vessels, and they started drinking wine out of them. And then mysteriously, this hand appears, this finger begins to write on the plaster walls. We'll get into that later. But that's going to sober you up pretty quick. And so there was a commotion. There was a disturbance of those 1,000 lords that were present. They began to notice, we don't see that every day. And it wasn't trick photography. There wasn't somebody there with it's been so long since I've used one of those things. What are those things we used to use? The overhead projector thing? What was that called? What was it? Yeah, and you put those little films on it, and you'd write on it, and it'd show it up on a monitor. That's how long ago I used to use those things. By the way, I was one of the first to use them in youth work. And I had some of the other people that walked through the church going, you won't believe what that guy's doing in there. I was actually using a projector. Can you imagine that compared with what we're doing right now? Well, there wasn't trick photography. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't magic. There was a writing on the wall. So he was terrified. His knees were knocking. Remember that? Okay, moms, here we go. So then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled. His countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, she heard the commotion. And apparently she was close enough in the palace to recognize something was up. So the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. That's a common, I guess you'd say that's the way that you keep in good graces with the king. But did you notice something right away? She wasn't called. In those courts, and you ladies don't take offense, but nobody, men included, had the right to just go in front of a king. You had to be invited. To gain audience with a king, you had to be invited. Apparently, the queen mother was not invited, but she was the queen mother. So she came on her own accord. Now, Daniel wasn't there either, but I don't think it was because he wasn't invited. I don't think if he was invited, he wouldn't have came. And I don't believe that he was invited because I don't believe that this king had much to do with him. I think he'd forgotten who Daniel even was. So the queen mother comes in and spake, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There's a man. There's a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. There's that plurality again. By the way, the word Elohim is a plurality, and we use that all the time in reference to God. There are some that say that even though it's a little g and a little s, that it's still speaking about the singularity of God. Okay. I don't think that's what's going on here, but okay. What I do think is that she's just making reference to the very same thing that Nebuchadnezzar said about Daniel. She uses the same phrases. In other words, I believe that she was in the court of Nebuchadnezzar because she was his daughter. When she married Nebuchadnezzar, he left, like I said, and she co-reigned with her son. And if this truly is Nicatress, that's her name, then she was a remarkable woman. And I'll give you just a little bit of what I know about that, but it's extra biblical sources, and so I'm very, very careful there. I want to try to stay as accurate as I can and not, once again, spiritualize this woman, but hey, she found her way into the Bible. So God must have thought enough of her, even though she's not named for us, to put her in the Bible for a particular reason. And here it is. And this is what I get from it. There's a man in thy kingdom in whom the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, there it is again, it was found in him, whom King Nebuchadnezzar thy father, now watch this, it's not a misprint, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the king, I say thy father, I mean, I can just see her. You remember him? And by the way, once again, I told you that this is Aramaic, but in the Hebrew, there was no word for grandfather. So she puts a double emphasis on this. Nebuchadnezzar, you know, your father's father, you remember him? You're not acting like him. I'm kind of reading between the lines, but she's saying, you remember him? Well, he took counsel with this guy, this man by the name of Daniel. Belteshazzar is his name. Remember that? That's what Nebuchadnezzar had named him, giving him a Babylonian name, yet he went by the name Daniel, his Hebrew name. So she says, you remember that? I say thy father made him master of the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. Here's what I know about that. He was no longer. When Belshazzar called in the magicians and called in those quote-unquote wise men, I don't know why they're called that, he called in those Chaldeans, the dream readers, Daniel didn't come. Because I don't believe Daniel was a part of that group. I don't think that Daniel ever really associated with that group. I don't think he was stuck up. I think he had better things to do. And you know, in chapter 6, and we've already looked at chapter 6, here's an 80-year-old plus man being thrown in a lion's den. I think there's a certain respect that Daniel commanded. And I know that when this queen mother showed up unannounced, it got quiet quick. Oh no, mom's here. I don't know if she was fully aware of what he was doing, but she shows up. God had her show up. And she said, there's a man that, in this case, his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, there's a man that Nebuchadnezzar trusted, in whom is wisdom and the Spirit of God's. And that's probably how she said it. Same phrase that we found in Daniel 4, same phraseology. In whom is light and wisdom. How does she know that? You know, it's one thing, I find it in my worldly travels, I find that there's a lot of people that think they know about God. But there's a huge difference in knowing about God and knowing God. People are amazed at the works of God, but they don't know the ways of God. Because in order for you to know the way of God, you have to know God. They'd like to see God work. They'd like to see the miracles of God. They'd like to be able to evidence that stuff. There's a lot of people that believe that if they could have seen the Red Sea part, well, I would have believed in God too. Not necessarily, because a lot of them didn't. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a lady that I happen to believe was Nitocris. That was her name. And she comes to this drunken orgy. She walks in, the handwriting's on the wall, and she says, don't be troubled. I know a guy. I know a guy. Same guy that your grandfather knew. I know that guy. And in him is an excellent spirit in verse 12. Well, how do you know that? And there's knowledge and understanding and the interpreting of dreams. He makes sense out of things that make no sense. He has the showing of hard sentences. He solves puzzles and disturbing or dissolves doubts. Were found in the same Daniel. Now he's named. And if the king didn't recognize the Hebrew name, maybe he would recognize the Babylonian name. And so the king named him Belteshazzar. Now, that's where I think a lot of confusion comes in when people are just reading at a glance and they see Belshazzar in verse 1 of chapter 5, they think that's Daniel. It's not. Daniel's name is Belteshazzar. Confusing, but they're not the same. So now, she's not asking. Only the Queen Mother has this kind of authority. She's not asking. She's telling him. Calling. So she says to him, very simply, let Daniel be called and he will show the interpretation. Now, next week we get into the interpretation. So here are 5 things that I learned from Belshazzar's mom. And they can relate to your mom. I think that there are exceptions to every rule. I don't think that it's fair for me to necessarily put someone in front of you and say, you ought to be like that. I think that I can look at these women in the Bible and I can say that there are certain attributes that you ought to try to emulate. That doesn't mean that you all do. I look at this lady, and truly, this is Belshazzar's mother. I don't know that she gets the Mother of the Year award. But there were some things about her that stand out. Are you ready? You're going to wonder where I went to grammar school. Number 1, moms know stuff. Moms know stuff. My mother had this sixth sense that she knew things. And I don't know how she knew them. My mother had this this sixth sense that if she walked in a room and there was any tension at all, my mom could pick up on it. And Mom would never let it alone. If my brother and I were fighting and we had it in for each other, and usually we would come to blows after I could finally catch him, she'd walk into a room and she would stop us right in the middle, right before I killed him. And she would say, okay, what's going on? There were things that moms know. There's things that this mother knows. I was taught very early by a very wise pastor to listen to my wife. How many of you guys listen to your wife? I know somebody that'd like to listen to his wife. She still speaks. She still speaks. Here. My mom, though she's been gone now for 3 years, my mom still speaks. Now, not everything about my mother was necessarily picture perfect. She wasn't a perfect mom. And I want you to think about your mom. Moms have a discerning spirit. Now, where am I getting that? Well, I'm going to give you some verses. You can look them up. I'll have my brother put them up on the screen. I think that moms are able to rejoice over the children that she bears. Not every mom does that, I know. But I think that a mom that has a discerning spirit will be able to do that. Proverbs chapter 23, verses 22 through 25. Moms rejoice over the children that she bears, usually. I don't know if this queen mother got all up in arms about what was going on in the palace, but I would imagine she was somewhat disturbed by it. I can't say for sure, but I know this much about her. She had the discernment to be able to say, wait a minute, buddy. I don't know if she called him buddy. It's easier for me to say than Belshazzar. Don't be troubled. I know a guy. And in this man is wisdom and light. And he's able to take hard sentences. And I would imagine by now she noticed the writing on the wall too. There have been arguments over that writing, whether it was in Hebrew or Aramaic or what did it mean. The only way that we know what it meant is that the Bible tells us what it means. It may have been the very words of God. Some have tried to put a label on it. I don't know if you can. But I'm certain that she saw that. What was that sitcom where was his name Steve Urkel? Did I do that? She probably looking at that wall. Did you do that? Well, no, he didn't. But I know a man. Now you stop and just think for a moment about your own mother. It's uncanny how much they do know. Laura would say to me some things about certain friends. She'd go, that's not good for her. That's not good for him. And I'd say, well, what's the problem? I don't see anything wrong with him. Well, I didn't say anything was wrong with them. I just said they're not good for my son, not good for my daughter. So number one, I'm looking back in the back with the teenagers. Moms know stuff. I used to think, and I used to do this to the kids all the time, and if I were to start out with this, I'm sure that everybody would probably give a cackle and everybody would start cheering. Did you know that your mom's not always right? Usually I get the kids, they'd start clapping, and at youth camps, man, they'd have a blast with that one. I go, yeah, your mom and dad's not always right. Yeah, preacher, preach it. And then I come right back with this, but your mom and dad are always your mom and dad. Moms know stuff ahead of time. I don't know how my mother knew that I was about to get in a fight with a guy by the name of Terry Buster, but she found out. I'm not saying it was the wisest thing she ever did when she called the principal, but hey, that's what moms do. You ever see a mother bear go after somebody? We got a mountain lion out at the resort, and I've seen her about half a dozen times. And she's a small Mahia lion. It's like a cougar. We call them that in South Texas. And I had a guy come in about a couple weeks ago, and he said, hey, I was out walking my dog, and I saw this lion. Do we have lions? And I go, well, we've got one, at least two, because I've seen her with cubs. Oh, yeah, she had her cubs, and I tried to jump in front of her and get a picture, and I go, that was stupid. Do you know what a mom will do if you come after her bear cubs? Mothers get the fangs out and the claws come out, right? I got to tell you a little story about one mother in particular. Sean was a football player. And when he was a freshman, he was starting, and he was playing a game up in, Cuero. So we were there at the game, and it was one of those games where Laura was with me. And if you've met my son, Sean, he has hearing loss. In fact, my whole family does. They have hearing loss, and it was, I think, 60-40 or something like that. Well, he was playing a tight end in his freshman year. It was a receiver up until his senior year. And so they were playing this team, and he was out on the line, and our side jumped off sides. And so, that's 5 yards. And so they're getting ready to hike the ball again, and they jump off again. Okay? Well, you think, well, certainly they learned their lesson, right? The third time they get up there and they jump off sides, and the coach yells out across the stadium, "Wilt!" And this mother stands up. And I'm like, where are you going? Well, he's not going to talk to my son like that. Remember that? And I'm pulling, and I'm grabbing, and I'm clawing, and I'm like, no, you can't do this. It's a coach thing. No. So I talked her out of it. But have you mothers ever gotten defensive when someone's attacked your children? Of course. That's another thing about moms I noticed. They are protective. Come to find out, the reason he hollered at my son was because my son never jumped off sides. Because he has to wait, because he can't hear as well, he has to wait till the balls actually snap before he moves. So the coach is yelling at my son, tell me who's jumping off sides. But mom didn't know that. So, number one, moms know stuff. Number two, moms are protective. Moms will go out of the way to protect. You can say what you want to about this queen. And by the way, if this is truly Nitocris, she had some amazing, and this will give me point number three. I'm not doing them in an order, but she was very industrious. She took over the projects that Nebuchadnezzar didn't have time to finish. You want to know what they were? She took the Euphrates River and she dammed it up so that she could put a bank down the river and cut out an embankment where instead of a straight line to the palace, it now had curves in it. That's so that any enemy that was coming downriver, they would have plenty of time to react to it because they had to follow the course of this river. That woman did that. And then she built a lake. She built a lake. And then the soil, when the river was dried up, the soil they took and they made bricks and they paved some streets with it. Then they took the brick and they made these great stones, kind of like a secondary gate or fence, so that not only did you have to breach the first wall to get to the big wall, you remember what I told you about the big wall, 87 feet thick, 350 feet high, 6 chariots can go around the top of it, and then there's towers 20 to 40 feet. You know what she did? She diverted the river that came into the city so that you could shut off half of the city at a moment's notice. So if there was a breach, you could shut down half the city, and they would have to, and I think it was 420 furlongs. They had the river when it came into the palace or into the city. They had it so wide that you had to traverse that, and you couldn't. because there were armed guards watching the river all the time. Now, hold on to that thought, because I'll tell you how they got in and how the Persians broke into that city next week. So moms are industrious. You know, the book of Proverbs, and I don't think that it's a bad thing that we go there. I don't know why we would run from this sort of stuff. I think that it gives me an idea as to what a virtuous woman looks like. And moms know stuff. Moms are moms of discernment. Moms are industrious. They protect their own. They protect their children. Who can find a virtuous woman? Her price is above rubies. The heart of her husband does safely trust in her, that she has no need of spoil. She will do him good, not evil, all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax, and she works willingly with her hands. And some of you ladies are really crafty, and I mean that in the nicest way. You're crafty. You work with your hands. And by the way, for the working woman, I think it's safe to say that there are ladies that work outside of the home, and I don't have a problem saying that. I don't think that it's disrespecting a woman for a woman to work outside the home. I think that one of the things that we sometimes miss is the sacrifice that women make to work outside of the home. My wife's been doing that for 25 years, since the kids got in grade school. So she's industrious. She has no problem working with her hands. She is like the merchant ship. She brings food from afar off. Mothers are providers. Now, I don't know all of the significance of this. I found it out in little pieces over time. But I do remember it. When I was a very, very small child, probably 4 or 5 years old, I remember that I hated bread tomatoes. I hate them today. If you invite me over for dinner, just don't make breaded tomatoes because I won't eat them. But I remember that Mom put out breaded tomatoes for us to eat. And I turned my nose up at it. And my dad, oh my. You know, we were brought up that you eat what's put in front of you. If it's crawling or not, you eat it. Well, I didn't want to eat it. And I remember Dad was going to make me eat it one way or the other, which was really going to be a bad thing, because if you knew anything about me, you would know that it's not going to stay down long. And Mom stepped in. She stepped between me and my father. I don't know if that was wise or not. But later on, she brought me some toast. You know what the problem was? We didn't have the money for anything else. Now, I didn't come from a poor family per se, but because I didn't know what it was like to go hungry, but not because I didn't have something to eat. It's because I turned my nose up at it. Moms have a way of providing for their families. My mother, I want to say this in the right way so that you don't get the wrong impression. My mother made sure that we had good Christmases. And the way that she did that is she saved every penny she could. She put it in her what she called Christmas fund. And it wasn't that Dad was opposed to Christmas. It's just that you were limited, and so she made sure that we always, and some of your mothers probably did the same thing. Mothers have a way of providing, even when it gets tight. Mom always has a way of making a way, and that's how she did it. And I remember those things. I remember that day at the kitchen table. I remember those Christmases. I remember that stuff about Mom. This Queen Mother was industrious. And I don't know that she spent the 23 years in transition just trying to stay alive. I don't know. I can't really read into that. But it could not have been an ideal situation, could it? I mean, on the one hand, her brother is assassinated. On the other hand, her husband is assassinated. On the other hand, one of her children is assassinated. She marries this guy that's appointed. I don't know what that mom had to do to survive. And maybe we'll never know. But she had a discerning spirit, an industrious spirit. She was one of those things that history says was probably more productive in the long run than even Nebuchadnezzar. You know that hanging gardens that we talk about? There's a lot of projects that this lady, it's attributed to her that she finished those things. So moms have a way of being industrious. Moms provide for their families. Back here in Proverbs, look at this. She rises also while it is yet night to give meat to her household and a portion to her maidens. Now, my mom never had a maid, but she considers the field and she buys it with the fruit of her hands. She planteth a vineyard. I don't know if you ladies do much gardening or not, but my wife does not have a green thumb. That's okay. She makes up for it in other ways. I'll get in trouble for that. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. She's not afraid of what she's able to do. You know, every once in a while we'll come in here and I'll look out in the vestibule and some of you ladies will be showing off quilts and things that you guys did. You work with your hands. Some ladies really can do those type of things. I don't think there's anything my wife can't do. I've said it before, and I'll make sure, maybe this will get me out of hot water. I said it before, my wife is my hero. She still is. Was she your hero? Yeah. My wife's my hero. My kids had a good mother. Never had to worry or wonder about my wife. Not everybody gets that. I get that. Not everybody gets that. So, she girds her loins with strength, and her strength is in her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. She's not afraid or ashamed of the candle that it goeth not out by night. She's not afraid to stay up late working. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She stretched out her hand to the poor. She's not afraid to give. I don't know about your mother, but my mom was always ready to give. I think I said this at Mom's funeral. My mother is the kind of friend that you'd want to have for a lifetime, but you wouldn't want to have her as an enemy for a day. That's just my mom. She was just now working into that thing about forgiveness. So she stretches out her hand and she gives to the needy. She's not afraid of the snow for her household, because her household is clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself covers of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple, which is royalty, by the way. Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. Why? Because of his wife, the mother of his children. She makes fine linen, sells it, delivereth girdles to merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. It's been a while since I read this, so I might as well finish it. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is a law of kindness. Did you know that in Exodus we're commanded to love, to honor our father and our mother, that our days may be long? In this particular section in Proverbs, we recognize that her children rise up and call her blessed, and her husband praises her. That's a good thing to have in common with that Proverbs woman, isn't it? Well, this queen mother, she had to be a lot of things in order to survive. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in times to come. I believe it's, verses 25 and 27. We talk about having a vision to rise up early. Strength and honor are her clothing. She rejoices in the times to come. She's not afraid of the future. Now, I'll tell you what, that becomes more difficult the older we get. She openeth her mouth with wisdom. Her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and she eateth not the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, and her husband also, he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise in the gates. Now, I said all that to say this. Mothers know stuff. Mothers are industrious. Mothers have a sense of wisdom, and that wisdom, if it's from above, is godly. And what I'm saying by that is this. Mothers should know God. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to give you something. You're going to wonder where you got this guy in about 2 seconds. But mothers should know God. But they should be respected at all times. Because mothers are still mothers. If you have one, you ought to cherish her. Jack Bailey, the host of Queen for a Day, said this, that every mother should be queen for a day, every single day of their life. Now, this is our day that we set aside. Since 1908, we've been celebrating Mother's Day. I wonder if there is a mother, a wife, a sister, someone that's had godly influence in your life that you're thinking about right now. If you do have that, you're fortunate. You know, I got to tell you, I've never thought about this twice until recently. I would never have thought I would have to qualify my remark about Queen for a Day until I saw a reality TV show the other day, and it was called Queens for a Day. And it had to do with men dressing up like women, and I thought, man, there went that illustration. Well, I had to go back to 1945. But if you have a mother, if you have a wife, you have a sister, you have someone that influences you positively for the Lord, it's probably because she has wisdom in her mouth. Her hands are industrious. She provides meat for her family. She is an industrious, hopefully well-tempered woman. And I'll close with this, and you're going to love me for it. It is better to dwell in the corner of a rooftop than in a house with a brawling woman. Let's stand together. Lord, I thank you for our mothers. I thank you for the ladies in our lives that have projected your image. Lord, we know they're not perfect. But Lord, they are deserving of our respect and our gratitude. Help us to embrace the truth that we found in not just this Queen Mother, but in all mothers that are virtuous, in all women, that we might recognize that it's a perfect picture that's painted, though it's an imperfect person. You know, we all have faults, strengths, and weaknesses. I pray that this morning, and I pray that today, that we'll focus on the part about mom that maybe we miss the most. We'll recognize in our own mothers that are still living what a blessing they are to us. And those wives that hold us up, that go into the Lord and speak on our behalf daily, I want to thank you for them ahead of time. For those industrious women of the church, without them, where would we be? Lord, I want to thank you, and I want to praise you for it this morning. And I pray that today we might make every mother a queen for a day. In Jesus' name, amen.